Welcome to Ethical Engineering, the most positive and optimistic subject of DPC 2017, and hopefully you're not going to leave this room hating yourself, but maybe thinking. That's the kind of idea. I'm Christopher Hoult. Bit about me, I've been practicing PHP commercially since 2004. I did Perl 5 around that time as well. I've built big things, I've built small things, I've built big things that people have never looked at, I've built things that lots of people have looked at. I'm currently a senior software engineer at Datto. We're talking ethics, so Datto is the reason why Hillary's deleted emails became undeleted. She was backing her email up, which we should all do, unless we're running for Congress or the president. Formerly at DataSift, where we were processing all of Twitter and all of Facebook, more on that later. And at Time Out Digital, we did magazines online and stuff like that. I'm also the founder and co-organizer of PHP Berkshire user group in Reading in the UK, so if any of you are speakers, or even if you're not and you're passing through one of the more boring towns in the UK, please do say hello. I also act. I also shave. Hands up if you don't like audience participation. 1, 2, excellent. You're very keen for that. There's not much, but if you've got any burning things you want to shout out that isn't, no more, please, no more, then please do shout out, stick your hand up, and we'll have a chat. Because I always think that this kind of subject is easier when we have some kind of interaction. If no one does, I won't take offense. Sleeping, right? So, ethics. What is ethics? Ethics is a framework for morality. So it's a system by which we all have some kind of thing going on our heads where we can figure out whether what we do or what we observe is good or bad. We can make a judgment based on that. And for a lot of us, it's just inherent. We can look at a situation and decide, yeah, that was a really nice thing to do, or why did they do that? That was horrible. So ethics are, they're baked in, even if we can't put a finger on it. But what happens when you need to share that with other people? It's one thing having that system internalized with you. It's another thing actually having to share a set of values with others. And then if you haven't thought about the way you think about whether good and evil is good and evil, in that order, how do you then start reasoning about it with other people in a way, or indeed to yourself, in a way that allows you to make concrete and justified decisions on whether you do or don't do something, or whether you judge or don't judge someone on what they've done. And there are many ways that we can go about doing this. There are plenty of philosophers who have thought about these things, and I'm just going to introduce you to a few to start off. Some fairly well-known and ones that you might either recognize or you might think that fits your model the best. So we have absolute morality. Now that's things like your religion, the 10 commandments. Thou shalt not kill, and thou shalt not steal, and thou shalt not covet. And those really well-defined statements of this is bad, don't do that, or this is good, do that. And that's really useful because they're quite explicit. They give you an understanding of whether something you've done is right or is wrong. The problem comes when you realize that the world isn't black and white. It's quite gray. There's shades of it all the way through. Not a numeric number, but it's a spectrum. But that means that sometimes, thou shalt not kill, actually, in the Bible, as I understand it, in the Old Testament, referred to those in your own tribe, or those who are of your religion. And there was kind of the exception for you shall not kill anyone except those who aren't us. So immediately you've got a bit of a gray area there. Sometimes you have to defend yourself. Sometimes you get attacked, and in protecting yourself, death happens. Which I hope that everyone in here finds deplorable, but I think we can kind of see where maybe every now and then stealing something might be better for the greater good than not stealing something. So having these really fixed, defined rules that have to apply in every single circumstance can lead to cognitive dissonance. Well, I was told not to kill, but if I don't, then they're going to kill me, and isn't it better that I live, and so on. So if my slides want to go further, there we go. We have relative morality. So we agree that stealing is bad, but if our family is starving, isn't it better to take something to feed them than let them die if they're starving to death? Thou shalt not insult someone. Well, it's kind of fine when you're friends and they like that. Slightly contrived example, but suddenly when you start saying, generally I want to follow this rule, but depending on the circumstance, I can apply it in different ways, we start allowing ourselves a bit of leeway on there. The downside of that is you can't, it's really hard to reason about that, and that approaches the way we think as humans. We look at the circumstances and we make a judgment based on how we feel at the time. At heart, all of us aren't robots, and we can't make the same decision every time, and we can't apply ourselves the same way every single time for that consistency. So we have these gray areas we can think of. So we can steal bread to feed our family. And yeah, might get punished for that, but ultimately we've chosen to do something that's not as bad as leaving people to die, and so on, as we go. We have individualism, hedonism. We're in Amsterdam. Do what you like, enjoy yourself, look after number one, which is great for you. If you feel good when you've done it and it's good for you, then screw the consequences. Not so great for the people next to you. Not so great for the people around you. And because you have that impact from your actions, that's when we can start thinking about good and bad. I mean, individualism, hopefully we don't all practice that. One or two of us might in some circumstances, but hopefully we apply that selectively, and that's relative morality. A really interesting one, and hopefully for the engineers amongst us, which is utilitarianism. So taking circumstances and trying to quantify the good that comes out of something, the benefit that comes out of something. So Jeremy Bentham was one of the proponents of this, who in the 1700s was talking about, well, you can say, if you can define that something delivers a unit of good, if an action delivers 3 units of good versus an action that only delivers 1 unit of good, then the action that does 3 units of good is better. So if you have a loaf of bread, you can either eat it all for yourself, and that's one person fed, or you can split it up into 3 and have less for yourself, but share it with others, and you have 3 pieces of good there, if we're boiling it down to the nearest one, say. And that's great. The problem is, when you boil stuff down to those numbers, you start getting interesting effects. If that good isn't equal for everyone, you can have something called the utilitarian monster. In this case, illustrated by our friends, the Cookie Monster. Hopefully everyone gets that reference here. Yeah? So imagine the Cookie Monster gets really happy every time he has a cookie. Let's say, for the sake of argument, instead of the 1 good that I feel by eating a cookie, Cookie Monster gets 100, right? So by math, we should be feeding him and not me those cookies, because 100 good or 1 good. So there could be 99 people and 99 cookies, and if we fed him all 99 cookies, we'd be doing so much good, which isn't so great for the other 99 people. And that's one of the problems with taking these qualitative arguments and boiling them down to numbers. Now, what we've been doing so far is taking individual situations and looking from our point of view and looking at the effects of what we've done in terms of good and evil. But instead what we can do is start thinking about rights. Now, I'm half English, and that half, actually the other half's American, and this one kind of approves there as well. Doesn't approve, applies. We kind of want to get rid of this pesky European Court of Human Rights thing, but unfortunately we're the ones who created it in the first place, so it's a bit weird there. But what we have here in our justice system is the concept of rights. Now, I think it was Immanuel Kant who came up with a few of these, and instead of looking at the effect of what we do, it's I think I'd be right in saying it's a bit more of a heuristic system. So it looks at general rules in which to fit things. So instead of looking at does this do good, does this do bad, is this right or is it wrong, it instead models the individuals around us, including ourselves, and says that each of us has the right to X, has the right to Y, has the right to Z, and therefore we can look at our actions in that framework. So instead of boiling it down to numbers or a discrete choice by the rules we have, instead we can judge it based on the effects we have on individuals. So we have a few of these rights are written down fairly well. We have the right to truth. So you all have the right to be told the truth of a situation. Just to be clear, I do too. We have the right to privacy, and if you're in the GDPR talk earlier today in this very room, then you'd hopefully understand a bit more of that. And that's very big, especially in the neighbors here in Germany, where everyone has had that violated in the past, and as a result, it's a lot stronger around. I have the right to not be injured. Now that covers being killed, but also hurt. That also covers being hurt financially. So do our actions deprive someone of their property? Do our actions deprive someone of their earnings, of their money, and so on? The right to that which is agreed. So if you have a contract, if you have agreed something with people, then they have that right to get what you've promised them in return for your rights to get what they promised you. So if you agree to do something and there's a contract involved, and hopefully generally when we agree stuff, we uphold that agreement, people have that right, so that's agreed. Now, what we can do is apply a thought experiment. There's a very famous one called the Trolley Problem. Now, people criticize this because it's not applicable in real life, and trust me, it's not applicable in real life unless you're a millennial, in which case home ownership or avocado toast can be in the way of this train. So the idea is a train is running away, you are the guy on the switch, you have a choice because that's your job, is to decide which of these two things gets run over. I'm going to throw a driver on there and maybe replace the concept of houses and avocado toast with a wall and a family of three, because that will help me get through this really dark period of musing in front of you. But what we can do is we can apply those different frameworks I've just gone through and try to work through this problem like that. So, you've got the trolley, or you've got the train, you've got a driver in the train. He's an old man, he's very experienced, he's the best train driver the company has, and you have a family of three, a mother, a father, and a small child crossing the tracks on one side, you've got a wall on the other. So, using absolute morality, thou shalt not kill, well, you've got three people on one line, and you've got a driver in the train on the other, so either you kill three people and the driver's fine, or the driver crashes into the wall and the driver is not fine. What do? You can't run away. Don't touch it. Yes. If you don't touch it, someone still dies, and your inactivity is still activity. Yeah. Get your head around that. It makes sense, I promise. So immediately it's kind of, what do I do? And you're sat there not doing anything because you can't decide what you do, right? That's the reason why you're not going to do anything, because you can't decide. Relative morality. Another tough one. This doesn't help us there much, but relative morality might say, well, if I do change the switch in some way, then I have saved someone, and therefore it's okay to have killed someone else. And you might choose to say, well, one person has died versus 3. Let's kill the driver of the train. Remember, none of us will ever be in this situation, we hope. Okay? I'm going to talk about death for a little bit. So here we go. Individualism. You don't touch the stuff, you walk away, whatever. I don't care. It doesn't affect me. It might do, but it doesn't affect me. You just walk away and you abdicate responsibility. And in that way, you have given up your job. Your job was to make that decision, unfortunately. Your job was to be there and to change those points. And, well, you know, no skin off my back. Utilitarianism. This is a really interesting one. So if we look at the good that's done, let's say it's good to be alive. It is good to be alive. Yeah, okay. One person, that's 1 unit of death. Or 1 unit of not life versus 3 units of death, 3 units of not life. We keep 3 people alive because there are 3 good versus 1 good of keeping people alive, right? That's great until you start thinking, well, hang on, is that right? Or maybe we should say, well, the guy who drives the train, he has many years left in him of driving trains. It's very expensive for a train company to train up the guy driving the train. So if we think, well, in terms of money, if you don't crash the train into the wall, but you kill the 3 people, then you save the money on the training, you save the money on the train, and you just have to pay out insurance on the 3 people. And that's really horrible, but sometimes that's what insurance companies do, and they're kind of horrible. But you might say, well, hang on, that old man, he's lived a long time. He's served out his time on this earth. He's only got a few years left, unless we've invented a cure for age. What about those 3 in the family? Well, you've got the parents. They're middle-aged, okay? They've lived a few years of life. They've donated good to the world. They've done what they can up till now. How much potential might they have left? But that kid hasn't done anything yet. They might turn into the person who cures AIDS or the person who causes world peace. And so maybe we should look at people in terms of their potential. The one guy on the train, he hasn't got much potential in life left, which is a bit bleak, and I'm terribly sorry this is after lunch, but a bit bleak. Or you've got 3 people who have got huge futures ahead of them, one of them in particular. And that's where boiling people down to numbers becomes a problem. Right. So those people on the track have a right to not be injured, and so does the guy in the train. The company that owns the train has the right not to be injured because they own the train. The person who owns the wall has the right for that wall not to be injured. The people on the tracks, and you can see how I'm not giving you any answers here. You can see how in all of these here, there's no one right or one wrong. And these are the kind of things that we as developers, as engineers, will come up against at least sometime in our lives, in our working lives, in our day-to-day lives. We have a responsibility. Oh, yeah?
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
I was wondering, maybe you were skipping it deliberately, but what about the fact that the 3 people on the tracks, why are they on the tracks?
So the question is, why are those people on the tracks? And the answer is, it's a metaphysical problem that I've posed in front of you at the moment. In actual fact, you're right. The train company has the right to not be injured by trespass by those people on the tracks. And why weren't they using an approved crossing point? But we're in the position we are at the moment. That's the way things lie.
Brakes not working on that train.
Yeah, why are the brakes not working on the train? Why is there... Sorry?
Maybe they want to die.
Maybe that's it, and maybe that's some of the good that we can provide them by doing it. This is getting really dark. So let's move swiftly on, but feel free to discuss death in the next lunch break. We're engineers. We're developers. We write code that is by one person, or if we're lucky, a team of people. But we can stick it on the web, and lots of people can use it. We amplify our abilities daily. We build these websites that thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people, millions, maybe even billions in this room, I don't know, visit constantly and use our software. And as such, any decision we make can affect that number of people. In a day-to-day job, someone who is serving at a shop can only affect one person every time they serve them, say. It's not quite the case, but we'll not drag that out further. Us, every time someone uses our work, we affect them. We have influence on their lives, whether we've built something that is just a color picker online or something that takes every single detail of their private lives with their permission. It affects them if you take it without the permission, but that's a different kind of ethical dilemma that I'm kind of putting forward. But we have that responsibility because we have that power. And that's where the Spider-Man comes in. Great power, great, yeah, right. Some of them land, some of them don't. But because we can do that, we have that responsibility. We have to make those choices day to day. And while you might not have come across a situation yet, you almost certainly will. If you already have, hopefully the decisions you've made you're comfortable with and haven't caused issues. And hopefully I can point out a couple of examples of where these decisions are made or what we can kind of do about them. So risk. This is Challenger, which 31 years ago exploded not long after takeoff. Unfortunately, that was as a result of these O-ring seals that were keeping pieces of the fuel lines together, I believe, which did not work under a certain temperature. There's a great video from the inquest of Richard Feynman, the great Richard Feynman, and if you don't know him, look him up and read about his life, he's fascinating. But what he did serving on there is he showed that the rubber that these rings made of took seconds, if not minutes, to spring back to their original shape when compressed under cold. And as a result, on a very cold day, Challenger took off, there was a fuel leak, and we lost a number of astronauts on there. The people at the top of the chain at NASA, the people at the contractors who are building this, were given information by the engineers. People like us, yes, but working on rockets and not websites. Given information by the engineers who did their job and said, we do not believe that under these conditions we should take off. And unfortunately, sometimes, even if we're shouting from the rooftops about what risks come out, we have a duty as people who can affect these and can see the future, if you like, of the effects of our work, to raise that and push that up. And yeah, okay, if your bosses don't accept that and they run on and something maybe not directly equivalent, but something bad happens and you predicted that, isn't it better to have at least shouted about it from the rooftops rather than just let it happen? If we see these things, we have to call them out and push them up. We can look at the things we build and we can see that they're built for good, but we can also see the ways in which they're built in and can be used for bad. So, does anyone get the reference? It's a ball and it's gray. It's a gray ball and it's from Uber. Uber built this program that sounds, on the face of it, like a good thing. They would analyze individuals on their app. They'd look at patterns of use, they look at patterns of bank account details, and they determine whether that person was a fraudster, whether they were going to defraud Uber or a legitimate user out of the money that they had. And as a result, they would put them onto basically a shadow banned version of the app. So no taxi would ever come to pick them up. They'd just be saying, no, they're all busy. So that's good, right? That's a tool that engineers at Uber built, and it has a good reason for being built. It has a good application in that it stops people from being injured financially. It stops the company, it stops their customers. The problem is that some people with access to that tool thought, hang on a sec, if we can determine whether someone's a fraudster, maybe we can determine whether they work for the local government, and maybe that local government hates Uber or doesn't want us operating there, and so let's not give them a chance to ride in the cabs to figure out if we should be licensed there. So what they did is they looked for people who had bank accounts connected to local councils, connected to the local government, the local city government, and shadow banned them. They were not doing anything bad. I mean, they were there to do their job, and yet this tool, which was built for good, is being built for shady. I don't want to lay into them too much, but Uber also had God mode, and you can see how knowing everything that goes on your platform down to watching individuals could be good, because you can watch bad guys running around the city in your cabs. Unfortunately, if you use it for stalking celebrities and then build an internal website to do that, that's probably not a great thing. Hopefully we all agree on that. And so the things that we build, we can't just look at the things we build them for. We also need to look at the things they could be used for. This is a hot topic, guns. They have some utility. You can argue that handguns to shoot people, maybe less so, but let's imagine we can think of hunting is a fairly good one, unless we're vegan, in which case I'm sorry to have offended you, or vegetarian even. But they have utility. They have reasons for use, good reasons for use. The problem is they can also be used for very, very bad things. So when we build things, maybe we can come up with mitigations. Maybe we can find a way of enforcing this kind of dangerous stuff that we built, enforcing the good use and taking away the bad use. So this company, Armatix, has come up with a few systems. One is this remote control barrel lock. It just kind of goes in, and only the person with the code can unlock it. This one is a wristwatch that if you're wearing it, means you can fire the gun, and if not, if you've ever watched Judge Dredd, the fingerprint stuff, that kind of thing. The whole idea there is to assume that the person who owns it is the one who wants to use it for good, and anyone getting it off them is bad, or a child. And so you want to stop use by people who don't own and aren't going to be using it for any good purpose. Another example, when I first started talking about this talk, Jordi Boggiano said, yeah, but what about a hammer? What about a hammer? It's got use. You hit nails into things. Unfortunately, you can use it to hit heads into things, or into heads. You can do big damage in what you do. Well, Jordi, unfortunately, wasn't thinking big enough. You could put a camera on that hammer. You can teach it to detect when it's going to hit a head, and then you could have an airbag to stop you from hitting a head. And that way we preserve the utility of smacking a nail into something, but we also stop it from smacking into someone's head. And yes, a big contrived example, but isn't it kind of worth us jumping through those hoops and making those decisions to protect people, either financially, on a privacy level, on a death level, any of those things? We can go that extra mile. We have that strength to put things in place to stop those from who would do bad to do bad with that which we have created. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. Just because you can do something, and we're developers, we're engineers, we look at a problem, we go, that's really cool. I can fix this with this line of code and that line of code. I can connect things together, and whoa, I could scan everyone tweeting links on GitHub And if they've got a tweet with a link to GitHub, I can say, well, they're kind of a technical user, so let's go off there and say, let's scan all their repos and say, well, they do PHP. And they've got lots of PHP repos, so they must be fairly good at PHP, or at least prolific. Well, hang on, we can jump off there, find out where do they live. Maybe they've got a similar username as on Facebook, and go off to Facebook and connect everyone together and build up a huge, big profile of someone to then say, I want to hire that person because they're going to fit in at my company and they live just over there and we don't support remote working, right? That's kind of cool. It's kind of fun. It's using graphs, which if you want to learn more about that, you can see us here this same time tomorrow. But also, you know, it's a challenge. It's something, it's a puzzle, a nut for us to crack, which is all great. But hang on, if you build that, then isn't that kind of creepy? Isn't that kind of invading their privacy and making connections of stuff? What happens if someone else gets that data and they don't care about the GitHub side of things, but they look at the Facebook side of things and they can see all the connections there and start building up a picture of their own from the data that you've collected? And suddenly you start running into issues. So just because you can doesn't mean you should. It might be cool, but if it's going to hurt people, should you really build these things? And there we get onto data protection. Yep.
I agree with you that you have a responsibility for the immediate action. So if I'm building software that is used to kill people, well then I'm doing a bad thing. But I think to me you were going a bit quick for the with the next step. So maybe I'm building software that is used to, I don't know, to do healthcare or something, to cure people, and then the person that is using that uses that software to kill people. That's, I don't really think that that's exactly, at least not only my responsibility, it's also the responsibility of the person using it.
So yes, I've skipped a step in saying you shouldn't build software that kills people. I kind of took that as a given, and I'm just, no, I know what you mean. At some point, responsibility has to lie with the people who use your creation. The guy, Daniel something or other, just a couple of days ago was denied entry to the US because he wrote curl. Well, we believe that's the reason he was denied entry. That's used in all sorts of stuff. Does he have the responsibility to stop bad uses of curl? That's a really gray area. I'd argue that curl does a hell of a lot more good than it does bad. But at some point, if you know your software could kill people, then you've got a responsibility to try and avoid that. There was a piece of radiation kit for radiotherapy for cancer called Therac 25. The problem there was the software that was used to run it had a race condition, where if you type stuff into it too quickly and hit enter into the GUI, it would deliver a previous value from the GUI in terms of radiation. And the radiation default on there was 10 times the recommended amount for the treatment. So every time a fast operator used that piece of software and hit enter, it irradiated someone 10 times more than it should. You've built that software, you've not built it to kill people, but to keep them alive, and yet your software is still killing people. Is that the responsibility of the person who uses the software to type slower, or is that your responsibility to fix the bug? And I know that's not quite your point where you're getting to, but that kind of gives an idea as to, we made the thing, and if it could kill someone, then part of our responsibility is to identify that it could and work towards fixing that. I believe, anyway. So data protection, if people can access your data, if people can look at your metadata, such as Mr. Snowden was exposing, then we can find out all sorts about people that in this country, in this continent, might not be a problem, but on other continents, it might definitely be an issue. Or hackers can get in and hack the Planet and the Gibson and make sure that they steal all your data, impersonate you. We have a responsibility to to securely and cryptographically hash passwords and prevent even the minutest amount of data from leaving our systems that would compromise people's safety or their livelihood. They have those rights. When people put information into our websites, they expect them to be secure, they expect it to be protected and used only for the purpose for which it was collected. And passwords, as I was saying, you might have a color picker that has, you can choose the color of the color picker. And in order to retain the color of the color picker that you picked, yeah, I'll use that. You might have a username and passwords so that someone could just easily log in and get the picked color in the color picker. So you might say, it doesn't matter about that password. I don't need to, I can have it in plain text in that database. It really doesn't matter. Unfortunately, people use the same password in many places, and people use the same username in many places. So even if it's inconsequential on your service for why you've collected that username and password, just the mere possibility of it getting out there, and getting out there in a plain text sense, could compromise someone in other environments. And that's just one example of where protecting people's data and the information they give us, even though it might be inconsequential, I don't know, if they give us the color of their eyes here, that doesn't matter. In other cultures, that might be a bad example, but in other cultures, something inconsequential to our culture might be highly detrimental to that person in their cultures. And that's where social media becomes an issue, because so the company I used to work for, we're running software that's inside Facebook. It's reading every post, comment, and like that you have and share. It's then taking that information, adding a bit more, and then sticking it into a big bucket so that customers can aggregate the data in there. So they can say how many people in this time frame, broken down by age, by gender, by region, said something nice about Coca-Cola. Now that's a spurious example, because hopefully no one prejudices anyone for liking or disliking Coca-Cola, except maybe Pepsi, but we'll get there. But imagine instead that you could scan Facebook for a phrase, this is a stretch, so bear with me, a phrase that is highly correlated with being homosexual, if such a thing was the case. Then you could say, well, in this region, this geographical region, there are only a small number of people, and one of them, with this demographic, said something that we believe to imply that they're homosexual. If that person's in Uganda and the person looking for that is the Ugandan government, then that little piece of information could identify someone and actually get them hurt, injured, killed even in Uganda. Another example in Saudi Arabia, if you say something bad about the king and they know who you are, getting that exposed puts you in jail, gets you corporal punishment, and worse. So the software that I helped build actually won't let you identify anyone at all. The regions are countries or counties in or states in that country. You can't filter for individuals, and if you have fewer than 100 unique people in your counts, we'll give you 0 back. It'll tell you it's redacted. It won't even tell you whether it's 0 or 1. It will just give you that kind of redacted thing. Twitter, if you upload a photo, if you take it with your phone or with the right kind of camera, in the EXIF information, it puts your latitude and longitude, it puts GPS coordinates in there. Twitter strip that before it goes onto Twitter, before it goes out to the world, because even if you're the most anonymous user on Twitter, if you take a photo of the Crown Prince of Thailand and you put it out there in any way mocking that person, if they can find where you were when you took that photo, they can identify you. And again, even though here, I'm sure you could take a photo of the royal family, get away with it quite happily on social media, in another country, you definitely can. And so we've got to look around and find ways of protecting those people as we built these things. What's inconsequential here might have much consequence overseas. Yep.
Aren't you forcing your morale on a different country then?
My relative morality, yes. Yes, I am helping to, well, you might say that if Twitter didn't do that, then they were leaving that that ethical decision up to the country and not up to them. They weren't taking place for that. And yes, that's something I thought about a lot, and I haven't really got any answers for you right here, but feel free to keep thinking afterwards. And if you do have an answer, tweet it to me. Speaking of tweeting, whistleblowing. How many people think that Edward Snowden was a crook? Cool. How many people think he's a hero? How many people don't care? Okay. Like I was saying about risk, like I was saying about raising problems and pointing it out, we have a responsibility to the end users of what we do. We can affect their lives with these cool things we build. And as a result, if we see people using stuff for bad, if people use the software we created for good and try and kill people with it, part of our responsibility is to tell people. If we can't stop them from using it, or we don't have the power to do that, we can amplify our voice by taking it further up the chain. Hopefully we're listened to, but sometimes we have to scream it from the rooftops and then run away to Russia to kind of get that out there. It's our responsibility to be good. It's our responsibility to do good. It's our responsibility to protect people because it's our power to affect those people, and it's our power to change those people's lives. I'm going to leave you with a final thought experiment. Again, when I first started talking about this subject, someone said to me, I've got a good question for you. So I'm going to leave you with this. If you wrote a piece of software that was being used for good, to save lives, to save money, to protect people, and a consequence of that software, of someone using that software, hurt people, stole their money, hurt those lives, would you delete it?
Can you delete it if it's on the internet?
Can you delete it is another question for another day. But do you delete it? So, thank you very much.